Hello, my name is Osha. I talk about American presidents, and I'm continuing my discussion in honor of Black History Month. Um, I'm continuing with the discussion about the American fixation on race, and today I'm going to be discussing the aftermath of Brown versus Board of Education. Um, so. Uh, Racism, again, regardless of what pundits and pundits and celebrities like Morgan Freeman may assert, and even Kanye West, or Stacey Dash, racism has been inextricably woven into the tapestry of America. Right, it is part of America, and we can see it in the laws that were created and the results, the consequences of those laws. Right. I talked earlier in a video about the racial integrity laws in Virginia between 1924 and 1930, of course, which reinforced anti-miscegenation laws that people shouldn't try and intermarry. I talked about the abuse of IQ tests, right? The IQ tests were initially used in America by people like eugenics proponents like Carl Ingram to demonstrate the superiority of white people and inherent innate intellectual inferiority of black people. It was further used and abused through other tests in the military in World War I, uh, through the Army Alpha and Beta tests administered to millions, to demonstrate that blacks were mentally inferior to whites, right, to their white counterparts. Tests were manipulated, especially for blacks in the South. Now, so even after Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP brilliantly proved that separate was not equal, right? That black schools were underfunded and it created a psychological impact, right? Psychological abuses to black kids, right? And then the uh, Supreme Court led by Chief Justice Earl Warren ruled separate but equal to be unconstitutional, and it was a de facto overturning of Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the ruling that basically sanctioned segregation, separate but equal. And so Brown versus Board of Education uh, ruled to desegregate schools. So even after that happened, white society in the South continued to resist segregation, right? And they used um, all sorts of plot policies to intentionally thwart and impede the progress uh, towards integration, right, in the South. And as a resource that I used, I remember there's a book called All Deliberate Speed, written by a Harvard law professor. He's late now, Charles Ogletree. Charles Ogletree was the mentor of President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama at Harvard. He was their mentor, very prominent professor. He wrote a book, Presumption of Guilt, when Henry Louis Gates, the distinguished Harvard professor who does the um, ancestry broadcasts, show ancestry TV shows. He wrote that book on Professor Henry Louis Gates when he was wrongfully arrested by Cambridge, Massachusetts professor. I was in Massachusetts. I lived in Cambridge at the time, and I remember I had lunch with Professor Charles Ogletree, and he'd autographed, his books for me, right? Personally autographed his books. Unfortunately, well, I've lost those books now, but he personally autographed, those books for me, and I was very grateful. So, in All Deliberate Speed, you see how, despite the overturning of segregation and the ruling by the Supreme Court that schools should be integrated, whites in the South and white officials, they continue to resist, integration. And if instead of integrating schools, for instance, in Virginia, districts actually shut down schools, right, permanently. There were school closures in districts in Virginia, right? And so many black students, because public schools were not funded, because integration had been ordered, black students lost many years of schooling, right? Black students who couldn't go to public schools, they were not educated. They lost many years of education, right? Because they couldn't go to school. Meanwhile, whites, right, the white officials, whites created private schools, private academies. They're called segregation academies, using public money. They didn't use private money. They used grants, vouchers at for white people, right? Public money, grants, vouchers, and funded by blacks as well. Remember, so the governments receive money through taxes, right? And everybody pays taxes. And when people pay taxes, the government doesn't segregate money by race. They don't say, well, this is the tax that comes from white people, right? And so we'll use it for white people. No, they just take everybody's taxes, right? Whether you're black, you're Asian, you're white, they take everybody's taxes. Now, while these governments in the South were removing funding from public schools, which meant black kids could not go to school. They couldn't attend school during this period when Southern white officials were resisting the court ruling that schools should be integrated. Blacks couldn't go to school. Black students couldn't go to school, but their parents were paying taxes, and white officials were using the taxes paid by blacks to fund segregation academies for white students to go to school. So you see the injustices of racism. We talk about that it exists. So for years, when people talk about blacks not being interested in education in the South or being and things like that, and new immigrants come and they say things they don't know, they're not aware of the history. You see the fallout, and it's a disservice when people like Morgan Freeman they shut their eyes to this history that exists, right? They pretend this never happened, or he doesn't know, or he didn't educate himself. And I wouldn't, I have to be cautious in what I say because, he went to school around that time. Maybe he was one of those people that, I don't know. No, he graduated before um, the laws of Brown versus Board were being enforced. Because Brown versus Board was in 1954, and it took decades. It took a long time for the South to comply because they started to create policies to resist, integration. And so, a whole swath, a whole generation of black youth, right, in the South missed out on education. As many as 5 years, were not educated because public schools were shut down because white officials resisted integration. Meanwhile, white kids got educated and using taxpayer money to fund these segregation whites only schools, private academies, segregation academies. So and there's that perpetual distortion of first of all blacks being the least education, and then this is the least educated, sorry, the least educated in America. And it's unfortunate when they weaponize one sex, right, the black female sex against black male sex and vice versa, right. Today you see these you know racist corporate media, right, racist corporate media touting the educational attainment of black women in America while repudiating black men, saying black men are just going to jail, they don't want to, they have no interest in education. So they show these disparities between black males and black females in education, right? That's another piece of disinformation and distortion, right? Manipulation of information. And they keep propagating that black women are doing far better educationally than black men, right? There's nothing outlandish about that. That's consistent with what is happening in America. But you see how it's used in a way to demonize black men. All across the board, women are doing better educationally than men in America. Whether it's white women are enrolling and graduating more than white men. Whether it's Asian, look, I once read a study years ago, about a decade now, and I found out that the people who scored the highest in standardized testing in America were Chinese women. So that means if it was Chinese women, not Chinese men, it meant Chinese women, even Asian women, right? Chinese women in America are outperforming Chinese men as well. So it's consistent across the board. There was something that I actually read in the news recently as well. It was saying this, that women are outperforming men educationally in America today, across the board, all races. So it's not just blacks, but you see how information is consistently used. It's distorted, it's conflated and used and garbled, used to demonize blacks, to create that black boogeyman, that dangerous black man, right? It's distorted, misused, abused. Women across the board are just outperforming men in terms of education in America, in terms of education, you know, not just black women. White women are performing white men in terms of education. They're enrolling more, graduating more. Asian women are enrolling more, graduating more than Asian men in America. So it's consistent with what you're seeing in black communities in America. And I do not think that Asian men or white men are being targeted, right, by black teachers, black teachers. Like, because there's studies, when I was at Columbia, there was somebody, although she was white, who did a study, and she read her study in class about how black teachers, right, from childhood, right, of black males, they facilitate that classroom to prison pipeline by classifying black boys as disruptive, by being harsher on them. And this study was saying that, look, black female teachers were responding, that they were even more aggressive in doing that, in mislabeling blacks, and then facilitating that classroom to prison pipeline, right? So in any event, my point is, um, when the media misrepresents information about black women uh, being more educated than black men, it's distortion, and it's disinformation. It's meaningless information. It doesn't say anything about black people, because when they don't include the fact that this is consistent across all the races. White women are enrolling more and graduating more than white men. Asian women are enrolling more and graduating more than Asian men. So, and that's consistent that black women are enrolling more and graduating more than black men as well. But they leave out the part of how black men from childhood are particularly targeted. They're targeted by, including members of their own race, right? Black female teachers. They're targeted and abused and classified as disruptive, and channeled through that classroom to prison pipeline. So this is in honor of Black History Month. Let me stop here, and I don't want to make this video long. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.